All right, welcome to the Gateway API meeting for September 11, 2023. We've got a fairly light agenda today, but as always, feel free to add things to the list as we go. This is a Kubernetes community meeting, which means that we abide by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. In general, that just means to be nice to each other. Thank you, everyone. I think everyone on the call I recognize, but if I missed anyone, we usually do give some time if someone's new and they want to introduce themselves and give a little bit of background as to what interests them in Gateway API. Happy to leave just a minute or so for that. So if anyone does feel like volunteering, this is a good time. All right, no worries. Okay, so first up on the list is 0.8.1. This is coming up awfully quickly. We missed something in the release process. So if you take a look at this one in particular, thank you to Frank for fixing this. We had something wrong with the cell validation for listener uniqueness. Frank fixed that. We need to get this fixed out because it could affect people that are upgrading to the 0.8 version. So that means, unfortunately, we do need a 0.8.1. We're going to have a lot of releases in a pretty short time by Gateway API standards. But my goal would be to have this released this week. There are just, I think, 4 things that made it into this release so far. There's the cell validation. Oh, that's double counted because of the cherry pick. Update to the changelog because we had missed highlighting that you can now specify more than one mirror backend, more than one filter. And then finally, a conformance fix. So pretty small set of things that have made it into 0.8 right now. If there's anything else that you can think of that you would like to get in, this is probably, hopefully, our very last release before 1.0. So if there are any other little patches or fix-ups, please let us know ASAP. Otherwise, we'll be waiting not very long, but till 1.0, hopefully in October.
Before we start the release candidate process and stuff like that for 1.0.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Once we start release candidate, that's the point of no return. We have, for better or for worse, largely followed the Kubernetes upstream release process, which means that there's no branching or anything to prepare for a new release. Instead, we're just everything is on main, and what is released on day of release day is head of main. Yeah. Okay, Dave, I think you've got the next one on here, a question about 1911.
Yeah, things got pretty heated with the gateway TLS, especially with like, hey, we need to be able to at least do something what we consider kind of like minimal for GA. I kind of view like backend protocol to be kind of in those. So for example, like if some ingresses have WebSocket support off by default, how do we allow people to do that? To specify the backend should then enable that protocol. And so what this was proposing, the mechanism was to just use the app protocol label on the service as the hint. And we sort of was like some unknowns. But like I think the ask for me was to go back to I think SIG Network and to like surface this, and there wasn't really any sort of objection to it from my perspective. But this was, I think, like 2 months ago now at this point. So I guess my appeal here is to be like, if not this app protocol approach, then like, can we come up with some way or some other mechanism to allow users to potentially specify like, how do I enable H2C and so forth like that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a reasonable request. I think what always scares me when I see a gap, sorry, like this, is all these tables require a fair amount of thought, and it's useful, but it requires a fair amount of thought to make sure that we're not, missing something that we should be, by being this specific, it kind of requires a lot of thought in the review process. I think what you're really asking for here is just some kind of high-level agreement that implementations of Gateway API should honor app protocol. And
Yeah.
I mean, basically that. So I'm curious, I'm starting to think there may be a simpler way to add that guidance without being too prescriptive in terms of, which I know this is kind of the inverse of what I'd usually say. Usually I'm asking for a lot more information about every corner case. Whereas in this case, by being very prescriptive about every corner case, I wonder if
That was a request in the past, so
Yeah.
yeah.
I think this is one of those things where it seems it's the classic problem where it seems like you should be able to get past without being specific, but you can't. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think, I'll have another look over this. I think from my point of view, I think it's pretty good. I need to sit down and spend the time parsing the table. I think that's probably as Rob says, that's one of the parts that takes the longest. But yeah, I think that and then the other thing we will need to be more specific about is how it will interact with backend TLS policy. Thanks, Lewin. AWS have designed a CID for this.
Oh, cool.
This looks really interesting. Do you mind giving a little bit more information about how it works?
Yeah, so we define a new CRD. I think we got a lot of requests from our customer is they want to, today there's no way to define whether the backend HTTP, HTTPS, or those kind of, protocols. So for that, we define a CRD for that. And you basically attach this policy CRD to the service. And if service is referenced by the HTTP route backend ref, and this is basically a CRD you spec for that, which protocol, whether HTTP, HTTPS. And we also, in the bundle of the CRD, we also define the health check. So basically you could, for this particular backend ref, you can define could before there's no way of specify the health check. So we also have a lot of health check for that in addition to the protocol. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so this is more than just backend protocol, like protocol to backend. This is health check and okay. So this is basically all the configuration, like a policy that extends service with AWS specific. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something similar on GKE as well. And yeah, we have similar kind of protocol type thing that is different than app protocol, but I think we would love to have app protocol as soon as it's more well defined now.
Can you for the folks who have policies that do similar things, do you mind adding a comment to the GEP so I can incorporate it in the references?
Yeah, it's a good
Okay.
call.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the first pass of this was a resource that would like essentially target and reference a service. But that has a can of worms. So it'll be protocol. App protocol seems to be easier if we can all agree on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. App protocol is likely a better mechanism here. I think the history of the GK specific policy was just that there were gaps in app protocol, and also there are some weirdnesses with our definition of protocols that may not be quite as standard as we would like. Yeah. Okay. So I think we have clear follow-ups on this one. I know myself and Lewin are going to add, and anyone else are going to add references or just comments with references to any config that we're aware of that could overlap with this. And just for prior art as an example, and then Nick has volunteered to do a pass for review here.
Perfect. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for pushing this one through. It's yeah, this has been a complicated one, and I appreciate your patience. And I know you've been going back and forth between Kubernetes Signet and this and it. Yeah, I appreciate you pushing this one through.
Yeah, Travis did call out in the chat that we could conceivably just have the GEP say just do app protocol using the well-known names. This one's also adding names for WebSockets and H2C, which are not well-known names. I think that probably we would need to do WebSockets and H2C so soon afterwards that it's not really worth splitting them apart. We should just do it all at once. It's going to be easier.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's kind of inferred that, do app protocol is something that should be done, though it isn't stated as clearly as we should make it. So yeah.
I should note that I will add that to I have been chipping away at a PR to add an actual implementers guide. Right now, the implementers guide that we have is actually a API designer's guide that has tips for us in this meeting who are working on Gateway API, but we don't have a guide for I want to make a Gateway API implementation and the things you need to know that. So yeah, and there's a few things in there that are tricky that are inferred or implied in the spec, but we don't have the right place to call them out. So that my idea there is to add a document that does that, which would be things like, hey, you need to consider various objects and make sure you're reconciling them and things like that.
Yeah, that'll be really helpful. I am looking forward to that because, yeah, our current guide is kind of this weird hybrid of both, and it'll be good to split it out. Cool. Okay, so I think we're good on this one. Let me keep on moving then. I added a PR that I would love to get some additional feedback on, especially from people that are implementing this API, because this is something that would require more work from all of you. And I want to make sure that it makes sense before we go ahead and merge it. The thing that I am trying to accomplish with this is trying to resolve an issue that I think is going to become increasingly more common as this API evolves and grows, and as the number of releases of Gateway API just continues to expand. We're starting to release more and more versions, which increases the chance that the version of a Gateway API controller you're using may be older than the version of Gateway API CRDs that you have installed in your cluster, for example. And there's not a good way to surface that right now. And I'm particularly concerned that we're going to run into a situation where users are not understanding why a certain feature is not working, and there's not really a way for us to surface that. And the supported features work that Lior is doing is very related to that, and I think that will help. But I think this idea of a supported version is also very useful. There are a few different ways we could take this. The way I've proposed is adding a new condition to Gateway class itself that controllers would publish on gateway class status to indicate whether the version of CRDs that are present in the cluster represent a version that they support. This is most likely to be false if the controller was built with, say, 080, and it sees that the CRDs are actually version v1.0. It may not represent an issue. It may still work fine for most cases, but I think it's still worth, raising some kind of warning here to say, hey, by the way, this controller does not understand or is not as new as this version of the API, so that you can hopefully update the controller or whatever it might be. Candace, got a hand?
Yes, I was just wondering for the case where there are multiple implementations in the cluster, what would happen in this case? Is this always going to be per gateway class that the condition?
Yeah, for now, this
This-
would, sorry.
No, the last word was exists, but it took
Okay,
me a while
okay.
to spit it out.
Great, yeah. Yeah, so this is proposed as a status on gateway class. What you may be alluding to is that we don't have any coverage for gamma right now because, again, similar to supported features, we have these concepts that exist kind of per implementation. So with gateway, we have a very straightforward way. You drop it on gateway class status specifically, and the controller is the sole owner of that thing, and it's basically providing metadata and information about that implementation. We don't have a similar concept for mesh yet. We've toyed around with a mesh resource, and that has not gotten as much traction as I'd like, but maybe as we're adding more things to gateway class that could also be useful for a mesh resource, maybe that will have some better traction. But yeah, for right now, yes, this is per gateway class, which means it is something that is clearly owned by that implementation, by one implementation only. So I hope there wouldn't be any kind of multi-tenant issues here.
Yeah, I had a bit of a look at this already, but I haven't done a proper review, but I really like it. I think one thing that's important to call out that you did put in here, Rob, is that this is very informational for the user. So the idea here would be that you implementations must populate this one way or another, but implementations don't have to not accept a gateway class if, like, mark the gateway class as accepted if they don't think that it'll be a failure. So in the case that Rob mentioned before, where you're written with 080 and you see a v1.0 set of CRDs, then you may implementations may say, hey, I'm going to accept the gateway class anyway, and just say, oh, this is not the version of CRDs I was written with. So if there's any weird problems, then it's on you. But like but also as it says there that implementations may to just choose to say, no, wrong version, I'm not working. It comes down to that's up to the implementation what you do, but there must be a supported version one way or another. So I really like that part, that it's very informational and very easy to explain to people, and it will make it easy as an implementer for you to be able to say, hey, can you please post the status of your gateway class object in a support issue? That way, as an implementer, you will be able to see if they're running the right version of CRDs immediately.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that as a support issue, but that is actually a really great idea. I think we're getting more and more information in gateway class status as we go here that will become invaluable for support going forward. Okay, so it sounds like there's not much in the way of pushback here. I do just want to call out to make it very clear that this, I expect for many controllers, will be the first time they're actually required to watch or at least look at the CRDs themselves. So just this is a potentially or likely an additional API call that you'll be making. And just catching up on chat here. Actually, there's a couple hands, so I'll catch up in chat. But go ahead, John. I think you're
Have
first.
you run this by any of the API machinery folks? The reason I ask is because we do actually read CRDs, and we got yelled at by the API machinery folks that we shouldn't actually be relying on things being CRDs and should just treat them as resources. And if they happen to be CRDs, that's fine, but not something that our controller should be aware of.
Yeah, that's good feedback. I will do that. I have not run this by them.
Okay, it was Jordan, for what it's worth.
Yeah, good to know.
Jordan had strong opinions, I'm shocked. Dave, did you have your hand up? Were you going to say the same thing?
I was gonna highlight watching the CRD might not be enough, because even though you have like storage version, but like you might have a gateway release that adds a field that would then be kind of like, I guess, but in theory that field should be behind a supported feature.
Yeah, so
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's because the only way that the only reason that this is viable is that as maintainers, we are extremely careful about ensuring that there are no breaking changes. There are no backwards incompatible changes between upgrades, like between release increments. So we will only ever add optional fields or do other non-breaking or compatible API changes between versions. I literally have large sections of that doc memorized. So
yeah.
And sometimes one of the reasons it takes us a while to review things is that we have to spend a lot of time like, in the event we change this, what's the default value? What's the zero value? How does the options work? What happens? Can you round trip this information between versions? And all those sort of API machinery kind of considerations. Sorry,
Yeah.
Rob.
Yeah, no, well said. And I think one other part to respond is it's not obvious. This attempts to make it a little bit more prominent, but every Gateway API CRD has this little bundle version annotation on it. So you actually get a SEMVer version instead of like just, hey, V1 beta 1 is present in the CRD. I support that. But you actually get the actual SEMVer Gateway API release number, which is something like that has been hard to do with other Kubernetes APIs before.
Yeah. And so like, I think that in my mind is the reason why we need to watch it for Gateway API. I think that, yeah, I can understand where Jordan comes from, but in general, it's not a great idea, but for Gateway API, because we are distributing this as a thing, and we've already defined that there is that label, and we are reading to look for the labels, not for anything else about the schema. I think those are the important points, Rob, probably, that since I won't be able to be at an API machine meeting.
And I think this is I'll see. I'm very interested in what that feedback will be, and I think that's a good call out, because you never know. But I think with Gateway API, we basically have this mandate that we are going to be a CRD based API, one of the first, and that is our journey. And so we got to make the most of it. I don't think we're ever going to change that stance, but we'll see. And yes, metadata watch. Yeah, maybe. I mean, this could maybe use some implementation guidelines as well. So yeah, I think it could be a metadata watch, and it could potentially look for a specific label. So your metadata watch of a subset of the CRDs would be all you need for this. And yeah, there are some implementations out there. Dave was calling out Crossplane, which has thousands of CRDs. So yeah, being able to limit the number of resources you're watching is a pretty big win. Cool. All right. Any last feedback or comments on this one? I will. There's a hold on this already. I'll make sure I get some feedback from API Machinery and others before removing that hold. But please also, if you're somebody who would be on the other side of this, is actually implementing it, feedback would be very welcome. Yeah.
I
Leave it at
guess
that.
this is definitely relevant to that thing that I mentioned beforehand about the implementer's guide.
Yes. Yep. Very much. Yep. Cool. All right. I'll keep on moving then. Timeout skip is coming up. I think this one is just Simone's implementation of this. We've gone back and forth on a few review details, but it's approved. It's waiting for someone to just do the final LGTM. There was some test issues, but I think we've cleared everything up. So if anyone is available to do one last round of review, we can get this one in, and it will fully be in scope for the 1.0 release of Gateway API.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
We'll probably hold off on merging this one though until 081 comes out, right, Rob?
No, because
Oh, no, we branched already. Sorry, my bad.
Yep. That's the one place we actually branch, for better or for worse, is old releases. So yeah. And that's it for that one. The other thing I just want to celebrate, thank you, Candace. Thank you, everyone who reviewed this. The TLS to backend gap is finally merged. It has been a long process, but thank you for the persistence, everyone. There is a pretty clear next step, and that is that because we're introducing a multi-tenant, what I would call a multi-tenant policy, which is something that we expect many different implementations to support. We need the policy to also be able to expand to the policy status to also be able to expand to represent this. So this will almost certainly look like route status. I think Nick has volunteered to actually define what that looks like, and just basically one more extension of the existing policy gap. But that's the next step on this one. But we are making very real forward progress, and definitely hope to get this in scope for 1.0 as well.
So yeah, I think Rob has called out a couple of times that that gap is very long and is hard to parse as a result. I agree, but I also think that sorry. I also agree that but I think that once we can finalize more details of the gap, that it will be better to split up the document and split up the document then, and actually probably once it goes to I don't know how, if we're going to call this standard, once it goes to standard, then we should split up the documentation and make it just a part of the website documentation instead, rather than it being all in one big gap. Right now, I actually did the opposite of that, and I have actually pulled all the documentation off the website and said, go read the gap while we get the details finalized. But as this gap gets closer to standard, that will be a to-do that I'll take as well, is to break this thing apart into a more readable, parsable doc that has better headings and better navigability. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you for kind of being the steward of that gap. I know it's a massive one, and I look forward to the day when we can get it to standard, when we can split it up and whatever. But there's a lot of work streams in progress around this one. Yeah. Okay, so those are the main things that I'm aware of on 1.0. Usually I go through the release blockers list as well, but I think right now, if I remember correctly, every single one has someone assigned. So I'm going to call that a success. And yeah, we'll go with that. Next up, just real quickly want to call out KubeCon. Unlike previous KubeCons, we're actually considering doing something that we would actually need to have a head count for in advance, and actually, send out invites and all the rest. And so having an idea of who's actually going to be present and interested in being part of Gateway API anything please do let us know. You know, reach out, I guess, on Slack is maybe the best way to follow up. We have a rough idea, but please, if you're going to be there, just let us know so we can make sure that we invite you to anything that's gateway related, and that we have enough space.
I actually suggest everyone if you're going to be at KubeCon, put yourself down in that agenda, underneath that agenda item. I will start.
Yeah, that works for me.
That way we've got who's going to be there, and we can make sure that everyone who's going to be there gets invited if they wish.
Yep.
And if you don't feel comfortable putting your attendance in a public document, that's fine. Ping Rob or I.
Yeah, I was going to say there might be somebody who does not want that to be public information. So like,
Yep, that's fine. Just
let us know.
yeah, ping one of the maintainers. That's fine. But like the and I see you, Dave.
Wow,
Yeah.
Dave.
Yep.
Yeah, who knows what's gonna happen October 30th.
Oh man. Yeah, so definitely understand, you know, and I know not everyone knows everything, but if you think you might be, we'll invite you, we'll make space for you. Just you know, we want to make sure that we include as many people as we can. Yeah.
Yeah, I just added a few links to talks as well. I probably missed some, so feel free to add some. But this was just a few weeks ago, or whenever it came out, I looked around and
Oh, cool.
noticed them.
I
So,
recognize
I mean,
some of
obviously there's more
those.
talks, but these are the gateway related ones.
Yeah, if you didn't see Tim's, this is going to be a fun one. Talking about all the failures of the API in Kubernetes, and he only has 5 minutes, so we'll see what he can put together. Yeah. Actually, speaking of Tim, I think yeah, how do we get across to the Slack channel? Maybe somebody else can drop a link in there, but it's if you Google Kubernetes Slack, it is not trivial. There's actually one thing you have to do to request an invite to Slack, and then you'll be added in, and somebody can probably link. Yeah, kubernetes.slack. Thank you. All right, so yeah, thanks for adding the KubeCon talks. I am looking forward to seeing people there, whoever can make it, and also appreciate and understand that not quite everyone will be able to be there either. Yeah, you know, one of the things that John added a link to a talk that Nick and I are planning to give, the most collaborative API in Kubernetes history. At that talk, we are trying to do everything we can to represent and thank all the people that have helped make this possible. This has been very much a team effort. So if you're able to make it to this specific talk, we would like to recognize people that have contributed there. So again, just yeah, one more thing, but there will be others. So just if you know that you're going to be there, we'll try and find you on Slack this way to get more information, like your contact information, if we don't already have it. But if you're not easy to find on Slack, maybe just, you know, put a parentheses Slack handle if we don't know who you are. Yeah. I think that's it. I don't have anything in triage, and it looks like nobody else does either. So I'm going to call that the end of the meeting, unless anyone has any last things to say here.
Candace has a good question in the chat, Rob.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's I mean, it's official. No, I don't know. I would say it hopefully is. You know, one of the things that I think is very unique about Gateway API is that we have more than 100 contributors that have contributed to this API already, and that continues to grow. I
think it's actually correct because most of the time the API design stuff in core Kubernetes is you is mainly done by like a very small group of people, because API design in core Kubernetes is pretty scary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
many reasons.
the way we could measure this would be, you could look at the people who have contributed KEPs that have modified service API. I think it's a pretty small list. We have tried. I remember with Ingress, when we tried to go from Ingress beta to Ingress GA, and made many mistakes along the way. I'm very familiar. But you know, that was an example where we had meetings. We tried to get as many people as possible to contribute, but in the end, it ended up being basically 2 or 3 people that helped contribute that API transition. And it was just really hard to collaboratively work in tree on core Kubernetes APIs. Yeah. So anyway, I think it is, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. Good question. And yes, we can always use Shane's terminology, the most collaborative network related out of tree API. So anyway.
Yes, John
Yeah.
has a very good point. Yes, Gateway talk titles are not the place for nuance.
Right.
If not, we can just make it the case before the talk, right?
Yep.
I'm certainly giving a talk about something that doesn't exist yet. So why can't we make it the most collaborative API?
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, I think that's everything for today. Thanks, everyone. Look forward to seeing some of you at KubeCon. And please, as always, don't hesitate to add things to next week's agenda, to help with reviews, etc. See you in Slack, on GitHub, etc. And have a good rest of your week.
Hi.
See you, everyone.
Thank you.